Hello, everybody. I just finished reading this pretty interesting book, The Most Direct Means to Eternal Bliss. There's a pretty cool exercise in this book that I want to share with you and really talk about how memory is involved in the most direct and incredible techniques for meditation and where meditation will lead, and update a little bit on my own little project, which, if you're following the Magnetic Memory Method adventure, has involved memorizing as much as I can from the works of Gary Weber and what he did, or says that he did, and I have no doubt about it, in Happiness Beyond Thought and Evolving Beyond Thought, which is here. And I have a whole pile of books here that we can talk about. But if you're joining us, let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. Hit the thumbs up. And meditation for memory improvement is one of the most important things that I can ever recommend anybody to do. And one of the reasons for that is it actually helps create the mental clarity and focus so that you actually can use the memory techniques at a much higher level. You can actually be able to pay attention to information enough so that it's possible for you to get the results that you need in order to be able to remember stuff. Because if you can't focus on information, if you can't concentrate on it, then you're going to have a lot of issues in terms of recalling what the images were that you made, and that will be a very indirect way to get anywhere in life, and you want the most direct way in order to focus and concentrate and reach your goals. And so it's kind of an odd goal to try to get to bliss, but what could be the what goal could be better than that? Who wouldn't want to be in a state of bliss forever, right? If you could. And this is one of the claims that a lot of these people make in these books, is that you can actually get to a place in your brain where you will switch from suffering and sorrow and worry to being continually blissful. So what would that mean in a neuroscientific way? Well, it means that you would go from default mode network processing in part of your brain to something that is more task positive, or, there's different ways. I'm not a neuroscientist, but that's one of the ways that they've talked about it. So we sit there and we have thoughts all day long. We think, and it's because we're trapped in one of the neural network patterns in our brains that is very I-oriented, me, when we actually could have a lot more bliss and freedom and happiness and joy in life if we were more focused externally. And so that is sometimes called stuff that happens in your task positive network in your brain. And so if you could get yourself to be more situated in that, that's called being in flow, or being in the zone, so to speak. And so this book is talking about this, and it has a number of exercises that purportedly can get you there. But the author of this book, Michael Langford, I went and looked at some of his YouTube videos and was listening to him. He considers that memory is one of the number one things to work on, that you must work on memory in order to do it. By the way, before we get started, if you're joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. If you have any questions about memory, meditation, anything like that, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And I want to thank Dorothy, who actually mentioned this in one of our Magnetic Memory Method mastermind meetings, and that was very much appreciated. I try to follow up with as many of the books that you all recommend as possible, and so this one caught my interest, obviously, and I gobbled it down, and I'll share an exercise that it has in there. But as I looked up Michael Langford, I was very delighted to see that he agrees that memory is the number one thing to train in order to actually get something out of meditation. And what he says is that people, they can read and study all the spiritual meditation stuff that they want, but if they can't remember the lessons there, they're not going to ever actually get the liberation that they seek. They're never going to experience this shift from I, suffering and sorrow, to this external and very zone-based, in the flow experience of bliss, and stay there. And so that's the mission that I sort of found myself following, to see if it's actually really possible. And so let's gauge your interest. Who here is interested in actually hearing what I think is the most powerful exercise in this book. Let me know in the chat, because I like to see that the audience is actually interested, and let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and just how things are going with your memory. Are you interested in meditation? Have you done much meditation? Where are you at with your memory? And that will be very interesting to know. Is my microphone even on? Anybody alive out there? Is this working? I'm not even sure if the chat is working today. I'm kind of curious. Let's see. There we go. I think we need some light on the situation too. Let's see here. That's a little bit better. All right, so the chat is working. Whoa, that's not better at all. Woo! Look, we're in we're in Terminator 2 zone. There we go. Oh, that's even worse. Am I in direct means of bliss? Eternal bliss? I think so. Oh, something's off today. All right, so that's funny. I like that look. I don't know about you. But the most direct means to eternal bliss. Do you think it's possible? I'm very, very interested to see if you think it's possible. While I see if I can get that picture of myself as Terminator out of my brain. Lady B says she has a question. Please do pop it in, Lady B. This is a great opportunity to ask questions. In addition to the points about the argument that memory is the number one skill for meditation, for being able to actually put any kind of teaching like this into action in your life, I think that the next biggest thing is this infinite space method, he calls it. And it's very, very interesting to go through it. I found this exercise astonishing because it's essentially what I did all the time when I was a kid. I used to play around with this all the time. Mr. Rosebud is in the house. Good to see you, my friend. How are you doing? Lady B says, I feel like I'm a slow learner and have trouble comprehending things. Is there a way to fix comprehension, or is it too late as an adult? Well, that's a good question, Lady B. And I'm a slow learner too, in many, many ways. So we then need to think, in what way is an individual a slow learner? So are you a slow learner of everything, or are you a slow learner of just some things? I ask because it matters. It matters to distinguish between, all things or some things. And what are you a slow learner about? What do you have trouble comprehending? Let me know more in the chat so we have some meat to work with. And it's very, very important. Specificity is everything. And one of the problems that people have is that they generalize and they are not specific. They're not laser targeted on what the actual problem is. So when you say that you have trouble comprehending things, what things? And if it's an answer like everything, then I think we need to, actually get some real examples going, because it can't be everything. I just said a bunch of stuff. You answered. So you comprehended what I said. So it can't be everything, right? Specifically. Mr. Rosebud is about to cycle to work. We'll be listening as I go. All right. Thank you for tuning in while riding. I used to listen to audiobooks before there were podcasts while I was cycling. Never would have imagined at that time that there would be live streaming people and people listening to live streams while they were cycling. Amazing. In any case, Lady B, I would say that that's the number one tip right now. And, if you haven't watched the live stream replay on crafting a vision statement, you might want to go and watch that, because it will help you get some goals going so that you can figure out what to work on, how to work on it, so you can start improving with comprehending things, because that's really, really important. And I'd love to know just one thing that you struggle to comprehend so that we have something useful to think about. All right, so this infinite space method, what it reminded me of is when I was a kid, I used to do something like this all the time. I have a distinct memory of doing it. And what's so neat about it is when I first started to do these meditation exercises, I remembered doing this as a kid even before coming up against this infinite space method that we're talking about here in this book, which has so many interesting things to talk about in terms of, can you actually get to bliss, and is there a direct way to do it? And we'll interrupt that with Lady B's here, because if you haven't figured it out yet, this is bliss. Right now, the way things are, as they are, emerging in time. And that's what this exercise is all about. That's what this book is about. So Lady B says, I guess when I'm reading something and trying to understand, it will take me forever to understand it. Then I'll go to find someone to break it down in the simplistic way like a baby would understand it. Great. So something is what? What book? What book would you need to go break down? And I'll ask you very, very specifically, because it matters, right? And there are lots of books that I also go and read summaries about to get help breaking it down. Are you perhaps turning something into a problem that isn't? I went to university for many, many years. I got a BA, 2 MAs, and a PhD, and I know nobody cares about that, but I did do that. And there's many times I didn't understand what the heck was going on, and I had to go and look up other things, right? So there's no shame in this. I don't see where the problem is yet. Politics, math, science, like what? Like what? What in politics? What's a book in politics? What's a concept in politics? What are you struggling with? Be specific. Specificity is the missing ingredient in so much of modern discussion and seeking help for anything. What is something you don't comprehend that you needed to go look up? I'll tell you some things that I didn't comprehend that I had to go look up. Architectonic tautology, right? Woo, what's that? Had to go and figure it out. Reading certain things in philosophy. So when you come across the concept of territorialization versus deterritorialization, right? Well, the authors aren't really as clear as you'd like them to be. So I go and read summaries of what other people have thought, read endless articles about what they're talking about, how they're talking about, what tradition this comes out of, figuring out what they're saying. There's no shame in this whatsoever. Not understanding is nothing to be ashamed of. Going and looking things up and having it broken down by other people who have made commentaries on things, there's nothing to be ashamed of this. Look, I have in my possession here a very interesting and important book that is Inquiry into Existence, and this is a commentary on the Panchadasi. It has the Panchadasi in it to a certain extent, but it's mostly just commentary on it to figure out what the heck is being said there and have it broken down. It's broken down so much that it actually has a glossary in the back to explain all the terms, right? So I don't see the problem yet in what you're talking about, and I would love to see the problem because we need to help you, but we need to actually make sure that there is a problem. So you say, I didn't know and still don't understand the difference between province versus state, cities versus suburbs, little stuff. I want to be smarter than I am, but comprehending has always been a block for me. Great. So a province, are you in Canada? I mean, you're doing this for political studies? You may need to think about, where do they use these terms, for example? And cities versus suburbs. Who is using these terms and where are they using them? So if you don't know basic stuff and you're catching up on things that you shouldn't know about, congratulate yourself. Very few people work on themselves. So this is super important. Just don't play it on the negative. Play it on the positive. I should, if I were to go around and, I don't know something and beat myself up about it because I don't know what it's about, that's not a very good learning strategy. What you need to do instead is go, well, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to be glad for every step forward that I make. And if you're using memory techniques, which I hope that you are, then you want to be able to actually use them so you can memorize the concept. So you figure out what is the difference between a province and a state. You figure out what's the difference between a city and a suburb. And then you memorize that information. You memorize that information and then you memorize According to whom? Who's making these definitions? In which book? Memorize the book. Memorize the year that the book was published. Memorize the names of the authors. Start to develop that database. And instead of focusing on, well, I'm catching up and creating this sob story that no one cares about, just be the person who is working on yourself, moving forward, and enabling yourself to actually have accomplishment and achievement. No matter where you are in the world, this is the most important thing that you can be doing, because no one else is going to do it for you. And if you let your feelings get in the way, and you let these, I just feel this way and I feel that way, what is that accomplishing when you could just focus on different things, different feelings, like the feeling of, hey, I memorized today the difference between city and state. And I memorized it in the context of how Canadians talk, or city and suburb, how Canadians talk about it versus how it works in China, or how it works in Italy, or how it works in Germany. I mean, these things actually do work differently in different places. And it's actually pretty fascinating. You also got to count your blessings too. Like, imagine there are people in the world who are worried about where they're going to get water and something to eat tonight. They're worried about where they're going to have a roof over their heads. Your biggest worry is that you are catching up on things that you think are common knowledge. There are people who would kill to be in your position. They would kill. They would absolutely kill to have this problem. So, reality check. Wake up and smell the roses, because you've got some really beautiful things going on when this is your problem. So the other day you were on the road with your brother going to a different city outside. I thought it was a suburb of our city. Then he teased me that I didn't know the difference. Well, get a different brother? I don't know. I mean, maybe he's just doing it in good spirit. If he is, then, have a good spirit about it. And if he isn't, don't hang out with him. Very, very simple. These are not necessarily the topics that I'm the best life improvement coach about, because is this really a problem? Or are you just trolling us? I mean, this can't really seriously be a problem. You just learn these things, memorize them, use techniques, and if people around you aren't nice to you, find better people to be around. It's very simple. All right, so the most direct means to eternal bliss does have to do with the quality of people you have around you, that's for sure. And so this infinite space method I want to share with you today is very, very good indeed. So imagine that you are traveling into outer space in one direction in a straight line. Imagine you have traveled 800 trillion miles into outer space. Continue in the same direction along the same line and travel another 800 trillion miles further into outer space. Now imagine you have traveled another 800 trillion miles in the same direction. Now imagine that you are traveling at the speed of 100,000 miles per second, and that you have traveled for 800 trillion years at that speed in the same direction along the same line. Now travel for another 800 trillion years in the same direction at the rate of 100,000 miles per second. No matter how fast you travel and no matter how long you travel, you have not come any closer to infinite space, because infinite space never ends. So this exercise goes on and on and on. I'll leave it to you to read the book to go through it. But what I love about this is that it is getting us to think differently about space and getting us to think about just how much capacity we have for the concept of eternity if we actually try to travel it, right? I used to do this all the time when I was a kid, so I find this very, very interesting that it appears in this book. And Nick, you're right. Some people are just that way, and we don't have to pay attention to them, and giving them our attention is obviously our foible and not theirs. So we always have to put responsibility where it belongs, right? Anyway, this exercise is very interesting also for people who memorize and use memory palaces, because often they say that they don't have enough space. They don't have enough space. But this exercise that I just shared with you, even though I just gave you a snippet of it, it enables you to see that you actually could never possibly run out of space, because your concept of space is so very large. There's no individual in the world who knows English or any other language that couldn't run that exercise and experience just how big the concept, and impossibly big to ever cover, of space is. So it's a beautiful, beautiful exercise, and I really encourage you to give that a try and think about it in the implications of memory training and using a memory palace, because it's just absolutely fantastic. And again, I've played with it a lot. Now, near the exercise, or near the end of the exercise, he actually reverses the process, which is also very, very good. So the space in and between the atoms, molecules, and cells of your body is touching the space in the atmosphere. Space in the atmosphere is touching outer space. The imagined boundaries are also space. The Earth and everything on the Earth is space. All the planets and stars in the universe are space. There is only one space, right? And that's very cool, because as you may know, I often quote Thales with Megaston topos Pantagar Kori, which is space is ultimate because it contains all things, which he was considered the first scientist and the first philosopher. And so that outer space is mirrored in some way in inner space, and then there's a way in which all spaces somehow touch each other. And I mentioned some of this French philosophy earlier, and that's, and territorialization and deterritorialization, and that's essentially what some of the people are going on about, is that space is just a thing that territorializes. It comes together for a certain period of time, and then it deterritorializes, it splits apart. And that's what your memory palaces essentially do. And even what your meditations do, you're sort of territorializing together. You're bringing together your body with the floor. You're bringing your mind together with some remembered space, some bit of pop culture, and then you're putting it together, weaving it together, and you're visiting it as it is territorialized together. And then later it deterritorializes, and when you need it, you go back to it and you get it back. Or whether you need to go back to your memory palaces or not, you're territorializing the information by visiting it. Now, I know those are big words, but they're they're very fun, and you can memorize them quite easily because they're pretty much known to you. But think of it as clouds that come together in space and then disperse. That's what all information does. That's what our sense of space does. You forget that you're sitting. You forget the feeling of the seat beneath you because you become part of it, right? You territorialize with it. Then later you deterritorialize. Well, Lady B, thank you for that super chat. Much appreciated. Really appreciate that very much. And thumbs up, everybody who hasn't hit thumbs up yet for Lady B. And you say, my comprehension seemed like a problem to me, which obviously turned into an insecurity. Thank you for giving me a reality check. You brushed it off as if it shouldn't be, and it's a simple fix. Well, I don't mean to suggest that it's a simple fix, but there is a certain, fighter pilot attitude where you do have to brush certain things off. And believe me, I do this to myself every day. I have to have a little pep talk with, little whiny doctor inside of me who thinks that, the world is against him, and everything's changing, and and blah, 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 and the whiny sob story, and the world's smallest violin crying just for me. And you have to do this from time to time because I'm looking for the most direct means to eternal bliss, but I haven't quite found it yet. Although, getting closer. It's actually delayed the publishing of the next book because this transformation happened that I just can't in good faith release a book that is behind the times when I have time and the opportunity to change it and fix it. But I was working on it today, so that's coming eventually. And to your point that or this use of the term simple fix, maybe there are simple fixes sometimes. There's probably a lot more simple fixes than we realize, and we can accept that. We can enjoy that. A couple other points I wanted to make about this book that I found quite interesting and very good. So a lot of people will, run screaming at this, but he says read every sentence 3 times and read every chapter 3 times. And so a lot of people ask me all the time about speed reading, and I often make a joke about how I teach slow reading. Now, I never have recommended that anybody read every sentence in a book 3 times and then read every chapter 3 times. But one thing I share with him is the concern that when you're speed reading, what does it matter how fast you're reading if you're not actually comprehending anything that you're reading, right? It doesn't matter if you're going thousands of miles an hour if it's in the wrong direction. So this idea of slowing down, digesting every word, reading every sentence 3 times, reading every chapter 3 times, I think is very interesting, because I've always been in the school, both in philosophy and in academia and even in magic, that less is more in some sense. So would you rather be the person who really understands one book by Plato very, very well, or the person who just basically barely understands a dozen books of philosophy? And I've always kind of been focused on more, well, let's understand a few things really well. And that almost gives you more understanding when you do branch out, when you do read more things. Likewise in magic, I've always wanted to be very good at a very small number of tricks, which is discipline, because there's always endless kinds of tricks to learn or variations on routines. But the most direct means to eternal bliss would be actually reading the book and understanding it, because he argues that the direct means to eternal bliss has been here for thousands of years, but people are reading too fast. And the first thing that they do, and I'm guilty of it too, is go out and buy the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, when they haven't even done the practice taught in the first one. Because he says the only way you're going to get there is through what? Practice, right? So because bliss and everything that we're looking for is already here right now, the thing to practice is the awareness that whatever it is you're looking for is already here right now. And that's why his argument about memory being more important than meditation is very, very interesting, because people don't even remember to to practice the tools so that they're actually using them a sufficient amount of time to get the benefit. And it's one of those checkmate arguments. He's absolutely, you can't argue with this. People don't remember what it is that they were taught. They never remember to put it into practice, or rarely put it into practice, and so they never get anywhere. And when you read this, you might think, man, he's really sure of himself. He's really convinced of this. But it's just true. It's true. So his suggestion is read every sentence 3 times, read every chapter 3 times, and then actually practice. And you need to work on your memory. You need to work on your memory so you can remember to practice. This is so fundamental. So Nick says, Stephen R. Covey says the same thing in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Read it 3 times. Practice makes progress. Absolutely. Alle guten Dinge sind drei, as the Germans like to say. So I thought these were some pretty amazing points in this book, and it is forcefully argued. You can look up Michael Langford on YouTube as well, and he reads long passages from many of his books, and I've been gobbling down a few of them. I like his blunt attitude, and it's just, you can tell why he's not a best-selling, New York Times bestseller, because he's just putting it out the way that it is. And I think that it's not a right or wrong sort of scenario. I don't think that it's a good recommendation to stop reading other books, but the point still remains the same. If you're not actually using what it is that you read in the first book, then you can read and read and read and read until you're blue in the face. And what he argues is that what this is doing is actually making your ego stronger. So because the goal really to have eternal bliss is to exist without an ego, if you continue to consume information as if that next one and the next one and the next one and the next one is going to finally get you to your goal, then actually that's strengthening your ego. It's just feeding the ego you're trying to get rid of. And I think that's very true. And it's, even though I do continue to collect books and so forth, it's why that I'm still working at memorizing everything in the Gary Weber series of books. And I'm sure he's memorized things that are not in his books, but at least what I have access to. And it's a massive amount of text, but getting there and reciting it every day. So it's not just about memorizing it, but it's also about reciting it every single day. And one of the things is that there's the constant temptation to go and memorize something else, leave this where it is, memorize something else. And I allow that to happen from time to time because it is actually good for relief. It is good to have some variety. Memorize a little bit of this text, then memorize a bit of this text, and then memorize a bit of this text, but no more than 3 to get the needed variety. I think even just from a neurochemical basis, we need variety for the production of norepinephrine in the brain. And so I'll focus on memorizing a little bit of this text, then move to the next, then to the next, but never more than 3. But the temptation is always there to add another one. And his argument, Lankford's argument in this book, is that this temptation comes from the ego's unwillingness to die, because it knows what you're trying to do by memorizing all this Sanskrit, by doing all this chanting, is kill the ego, which is what I'm trying to do. And so then the ego is going to resist. It's going to want more things. It's going to want more knowledge. It's going to want more variation on the same teaching, etc., rather than just sitting down and focusing and doing the work, getting it done. But I think the catch there is, and where he might, given his interest in memory and his focus on it and mentioning memory so much, especially in some of his YouTube videos, I think one would need to acknowledge, as many spiritual teachers have started to do, the fact that a brain exists and that brain is governed by rules and it just needs variety. It does need it. It's actually not going to very easily accomplish these goals without different kinds of things to memorize, so to speak. And been reading recently also Michael Roach, and he memorized a lot of texts. And it's sort of a similar thing. It's not like you could ever memorize just one thing without a break to go and work on something else. You need a certain amount of variety. And this is just what I found in my own experience. And so when I was finished memorizing about half of this, I didn't need a break from memorizing, but I needed some novelty. So I started to memorize the Upadesa Saram, which is given in this book, Happiness Beyond Thought. And then, so I finished this piece, which is Ribhu Gita in Evolving Beyond Thought. And then, so just focusing only on Upadesa, I started to memorize some stuff from the Bhagavad Gita. And so, yeah, I just have alternated and then start to do a bit of Ashtavakra Gita, but maximum 3. And so next question is, when is the time to move to something else? I would say, I don't necessarily know that I can say when is the time for you to move to a next thing or not. But for me, when it's just like, wow, this is a chore to show up to this, just refresh it with something a little bit different. And this basically relates to the challenge frustration curve that we talk a lot about on this channel, where if things get too easy, then you will get bored and frustrated and annoyed. If they get too challenging, then you'll get frustrated and want to give up. So I think that what ends up happening, at least with my experience memorizing these Sanskrit texts, is that there's a rhythmical similarity in each text, and something of a phonic similarity. So because of how they're structured and how Weber has arranged, at least the Ribhu Gita, the Upadesa Saram was written and arranged by Ramana Maharshi. There's a kind of, there's an exhaustion, so to speak, of dealing with like, because of the rhythmical patterns being very, very similar. So by going to Bhagavad Gita, which is in a kind of, I don't know if a Sanskrit scholar would call it this, but that's what I would call it. It's in a free verse. So Upadesa is very rhyme oriented, and then the Ribhu, as Gary has put it together, is very it's got a lot of assonance and consonants mirroring, so to speak. But then you go to Bhagavad, and all of a sudden the challenge goes way up, because you don't have those features of the language are actually aids to memory. So rhyme and assonance and consonants and all that those are aids to memory. But then all of a sudden in the Bhagavad, it's gone. So suddenly you're refreshed. You have this novel challenge, and gets to be that it's almost too novel in some sense. And so I just like to vary back and forth. And you're right, it is like a difficulty curve in game design. Definitely, definitely. And, it's one of the things that people struggle with when they're learning the major or a 00 to 99, because you can get essentially similarity fatigue in a way. But the thing is just to have another project. So if you were learning 00 to 99, making your own system, getting it into memory, then, you could just take a break, even in the same day, do a bit in the morning of the numbers, and then memorize some poetry or memorize some foreign language vocabulary. And this is a really important point, because you want the fullest possible range of memory skills. You want some verbatim, you want some vocabulary, ideally in multiple languages, you want some numbers, and you want to be able to have that range of skills precisely so that you can continue to grow and have a difficulty curve. Make it like a game. This is why I often teach people when they're memorizing vocabulary, well, how many words a day should I do? Don't set a rule. Let something external decide. Get some dice, roll the dice. So you know that if every memory palace has 10 stations and you just get one die and you roll it, then you'll always have enough space in the memory palace to work with, but you'll never know. And obviously there's all kinds of different die, so you could get 10 sided, I'm sure. But if not, whatever, you can figure out some sort of pattern where rolling the dice will lead you, or you get a random number generator that will lead you to, some days you memorize 7 words, some days you memorize 2, some days you memorize 8, and it's never quite the same. So it manages this challenge frustration curve for you. And then of course you can double it, because you can add more die to the mix and you can make bigger memory palaces and so forth. But it's a surprise and it keeps it novel. All right. Irafita 1548 says, Anthony, how would you memorize the grammar of a language using memory techniques? Thanks for that question. I wouldn't memorize the grammar, because you can memorize phrases that allow you to absorb the grammar naturally. If you needed to memorize grammar rules, then I would assign a memory palace to that grammar rule and memorize about 10 examples in that. There's a video on tips for memorizing grammar if you need to do it on this channel. So search that up, or I can even potentially find it here and put it up. But I'm not going to look for it now. But anyway, just search my channel, my name, for memorizing grammar, and it's there. Let's see here. Nick said perfection is a bad goal to have. What is the indicators of memorization goal being achieved? So yes, perfection is a very bad goal to have, because perfectionists are not very good at perfection, are they? I've never met a perfectionist that actually got anything perfect. If anything, their perfectionism prevents them from doing anything at all, ever completing anything. So the indicator of a memorization goal being achieved, great question, but it's a question to ask for each goal. So the goal of memorizing, the Upadesa Saram is that the Upadesa Saram is memorized. It's not done yet, but memorizing the Ribhu Gita passages is done. So that goal is done. But now there's the thing of reciting it and adding onto it and so forth. So Ribhu is done. Upadesa is not. There's 60 some odd passages of the Bhagavad Gita in Dancing Beyond Thought. I don't know if I'm going to memorize them all, but if I do make that goal, then the goal will be done when I've memorized it all and can recite it with my eyes closed, as I've done with the Ribhu Gita so far. I'll probably do a demonstration with Upadesa when I'm done with that. And yeah, so those are very, very tight and tidy goals. In language learning, though, it can be a bit more difficult, because fluency is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything, that word. There's, all kinds of different ways that an individual can interpret that. So you can make a goal, for example, like I did, just to have an experience. I got into level 3 in Chinese. I was a bit blown away, and without having taken a class, they're just like, well, you're good enough to be in level 3, so bang, I'm in level 3. And so the goal is to get the certificate for level 3. And I don't know if I'll go to level 4 or not, but that is a kind of goal, because where I'm at with Chinese is very different than, for example, what I did with German. And in German, there were much more specific goals there as well. So you got to pick your own goals and figure out what they're going to be. And you'll know that they're done because you're the one who created the goal. And in terms of memorization, a lot of people, one of the goals that they create for themselves is to go and compete in a competition. And they're going to be, depending on the nature of the competition, they're going to be challenged to demonstrate different disciplines. So there'll be abstract images, there'll be numbers, there'll be spoken numbers versus written numbers, there'll be vocabulary, potentially spoken vocabulary versus written vocabulary, etc. And those are real interesting challenges. I've sat for them myself, and they really show you a lot about how your memory works and where your skills are at for competing with your memory, which is very different in a different life. And, Nick, I was at a meeting with you in NRG. My memory goal there was just to memorize the names of everybody and then recite it, which I did successfully. So I know that goal was successful. And I was with William, who was at that meeting the other day, I was with him the other day, who was at that meeting, which must have been a year ago. And I had made it my goal to memorize all those names and retain them. And I just went through everybody. And he was like, yeah, that was everybody who was there. Maybe we missed somebody. I don't think so, though. And I just made my goal for that meeting. I don't do it for every meeting that I'm going to memorize everybody eternally under the sun. But in that case, I wanted to maintain that group. So that was that goal. And it wasn't a very good goal because I didn't have a specific day I was going to test it. But we were just talking about memory, and he was asking about this, that, and the other thing. And I said, yeah, well, for example, I can tell you who all those people were a year later, or maybe it's less than a year or more than a year. I didn't memorize the day that it happened, but it's been at least about a year. And so that goal is for long-term retention. I'll probably remember them for many years to come, but I don't know exactly how. I have to then set a goal to refresh it, and that's pretty much something I do on autopilot from time to time, but I have to consciously make sure that I do it. All right, let's see here. Goju. Hello, Goju. Thanks for being here. And yes, it is always nice to lead with a greeting, and no problem if not. I do sometimes use the same memory palace over and over, but that's for memorizing cards, which are always nearby. So I will use this memory palace over and over and over again. Then it depends. Sometimes you use a memory palace over and over again because you're compounding. You'll memorize some vocabulary in a memory palace, and then you go back and add phrases. So, for example, Junbei in Chinese, just memorize Junbei and then go back and add Ni Junbei hao le ma, right? That's now a phrase that's added. So that's reusing a memory palace. There is the definitive guide to reusing a memory palace here on the YouTube channel. And enjoy. Irafita says, just watch the grammar video. It was quite useful. Thank you. Awesome. I hope you hit the thumbs up, and will leave us a comment on that video. That would appreciate it. It helps the robots know that humans care about this, which, by the way, if you're just joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know in the chat where you are in the world, what you're doing. We're talking about the most direct means to eternal bliss. Quite a good book. I recommend it, actually. And it's got some interesting quirks related to memory, as we've already discussed. Goju says, you have so much material. Is there a good starting place? What are the basics of the memory palace? I highly recommend that everybody start with the free course at magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. And the reason why is because then everything makes much more sense. The course obviously works in conjunction with the YouTube channel, and the basic principle is if you're a mature learner and you really want to learn something, then sit down, take the course. Many, many thousands of people have taken this course, and we just shot a new playlist today, and one of the things that I put in the instructions for Ali, who does all the editing. Hi, Ali, if you're watching. Wonderful, wonderful contribution that she makes to this project is to take some of these Memory Palace drawings that I've created and like have them flash on the screen. Not that I've created, but that others have created and sent to me, and have them sort of flash on the screen, because there are thousands of them that I've received. And it's very, very important to draw Memory Palaces. If you're not drawing them, then you're missing out on a huge benefit of the skill, learning it faster, using it more with greater integrity and depth of understanding. So yeah, that's where I would suggest that you start. There is so much material, but if you want it to all be crystalline and focused and help you create goals, make sure you've taken the free course. And that free course is not on YouTube. It's on my own website at magneticmemorymethod.com/YT. So if you're just joining us, hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. Goju asks, how many stations for a universal memory palace? Apologies for so many questions. Never apologize. No need to apologize. I don't know what you mean by universal memory palace. So if you can let me know more about what that means, I can answer more specifically. How many memory palaces do you suppose one needs throughout life? One for every topic subject? I would say that you need as many as you can possibly make. And in the new playlist that we shot today, which will be coming out, I talk about just making this as a habit for life. And I talk about why that I'm making it for a habit for life. So I'll leave that for when that series comes out, because you'll probably be in the similar situation that I am, and making sure you're exercising your spatial memory is huge for the longevity of your brain. So how many you need is as many as you can get, to just give you a direct answer. New Jersey, excellent. Whereabouts in New Jersey? I worked in New Jersey back in the day, assuming NJ means New Jersey. By universal, I mean a general memory palace you would use in a pinch to memorize something on the fly. Well, that I often think of as an impromptu memory palace. So you should be able to just use the room that you're in. There's a video on this channel about making impromptu memory palaces. All right, so you went to Rutgers. That's where I taught, in New Brunswick. So that's quite interesting. We've been in the same place, my friend. Yeah, so an impromptu memory palace. There's a video and a blog post talking all about this. And, I just mentioned chatting with Nick here when I gave a presentation at one of his meetings there. I just walk in the room, I memorize all their names, and I use the room as a memory palace. A lot of people, they use people's faces to memorize names. I never do that. It's not the way I roll. I need to actually use the room, because I don't want the imagery I create to interfere with their faces. It not only interferes with my ability to interact with them, but it also interferes with the long-term memorization process and remembering what their faces look like. So you're 49 and a mature learner, as you said. Great. Well, so everybody who has a 00 to 99, what's your image for 49? Share that in the chat if you like, or in the discussion below if you're watching the replay. A mature learner doesn't have anything to do with age, though. What is a mature learner? A mature learner, basically linking back to this, is someone who follows the instructions and finishes what they start. They actually read things from beginning to end. They watch videos from beginning to end. They pay attention, to what it is that they're doing in order to achieve goals. Intelligence is nothing more than the ability to create and accomplish goals, right? That's what mature learners do. They have goals. They learn something. They learn it thoroughly and with depth. And so this guy is saying that the most direct means to eternal bliss is to learn how to practice the meditation techniques that are known to get you there. But his argument is that most people don't even remember the instructions. So they need to read every sentence 3 times. They need to read every chapter 3 times. And he says, work on your memory. And again, I'm supplementing this with some of his YouTube videos. So look him up if you want to listen to some of his YouTube videos. It's not so much in this book. He does mention memory in this book, but it's not so much that he makes this stern argument. But he makes a huge argument in one of his videos about how badly people's memories are. And you see that influence here where he's like, read every sentence 3 times, read every chapter 3 times. And it's easy for the ego to come in and say, well, this guy's annoying. But actually, he's right, because most people do not accomplish goals because they don't even remember the steps. And on top of that, they don't remember to actually implement the steps. And so they're not really particularly mature, are they? They're not particularly intelligent, because all intelligence is the ability to set and accomplish goals. It's nothing else. There's nothing more to it. I don't care about IQ, couldn't care less. There's people who have very, very low IQ who are billionaires. Why? Because they have the ability to set and accomplish goals, or have others accomplish goals for them, which is an even higher mark of intelligence, don't you think? And then there's all these people who have PhDs who sit there and whine and cry and do their socialist little dances, and all this garbage that goes on in the world because their PhDs and their IQs don't enable them to set and complete meaningful goals. The world's not so complicated, is it? Very, very simple. Very, very simple. And we are ruled by the people who can set and accomplish goals every single time. Ain't going to change either anytime soon. If anything, those people are now using their ability to set and accomplish goals to get machines to set and accomplish goals faster and with greater efficiency than ever before. And they themselves are getting caught up in some of that. And it's making all kinds of interesting messes, all of which was, to the astute reader, predicted a long time ago. Goju says, I might call that volition, maybe. I'm not sure why you would do that. Please say more. Sounds very interesting. Change to the idea. But the larger point I'm trying to make is that intelligence is often a trap. It's certainly been something that has trapped me many times, so-called intelligence. Whereas just being able to set and complete goals would be a much higher and more admirable thing to be able to do. And this is ultimately what it is in memorization, right? So many people overthink the memory palace. We had a very fun live stream at the time that I normally do it recently, and it was about, how to stop overthinking the memory palace. There are people who would benefit so much from these techniques if they would stop overthinking them, stop intellectualizing it. This is another thing this guy says, is you want to go and read more books because you'd rather intellectualize the techniques, the process, the path, so to speak, to getting yourself enlightened. You'd rather just intellectualize it rather than doing it, because it's just known how to do it, but people don't do it. And it's the same thing with memory palaces. There's people I've talked to on the phone who are longtime supporters of this, who basically it always comes down to is, well, they just want to know how the techniques work. They just want to know how they do it. They're more interested in conceptualizing and imagining the techniques than they are in actually ever sitting down and doing something with them. Right? And it's not that they're bad people. It's not that they're unintelligent people or anything like that. It's just that that's not really what intelligence is. Intelligence is, well, I want to learn these things, so I know that what I have to do is learn them and practice them. I practice them every day. And yes, it's work. Yes, it's practice. It's got that sweat. But I have some rules and principles that guide it. So there's the Peach Principle. Anybody know the Peach Principle? If you haven't, check out that video. It's practice encoding at calm hours, right? P-E-A-C-H. Practice encoding at calm hours. What is practice? Well, practice is being prepared with a plan for what it is that you're going to do. Luckily, a lot of the things I memorize, I don't have to do much planning because it's just as simple as, well, did I memorize what was on the next page or not? No, well, then the plan is to memorize what's on the next page. But nonetheless, it's being prepared and planning. And it's also doing it with some sort of structure, some sort of schedule, so that it is regular and consistent, ideally at the same time of day. And then there are some tools of analysis, right? And this analysis is something that is best captured in a memory journal. And so it's actually not that intelligent at the end of the day. It's just a structure. But it's very hard for some people to do. And I don't know exactly why. This book just basically dumps on them for being so ridiculous and silly and not being able to get it sorted out. But it says it's the ego that gets in the way. And I've often argued this many, many times, is that a lot of the reason why people don't actually just sit down and learn and practice the memory techniques is because they know they'll be called to be a higher version of themselves. If you actually learn all of that information, you're going to be called to be a higher version of yourself. I remember on a recent live stream saying, someone named Sue called up, and I said, look, the only thing you need to be worried about here is if you're actually going to be the higher person that you will be, if your memory is trained, if you're able to learn and remember more at that speed, you're going to be called to be a better professional, because you will be a better professional. And that is a burden. Remember Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. A lot of people don't want that responsibility, and so their intelligence works against them because it's the ego trying desperately to cause them to save the energy, right? Which is what egos do. That's what egos were developed for in an evolutionary sense. They were to stop humans from running around doing stuff all the time because they needed to preserve energy. They needed to go and hide in the shade and wait for the tiger to be done with that carcass so they could run out and eat the remains. All this warrior crap, spears and all this stuff, hunting tigers, maybe, but not in the earliest of times. We needed to preserve every energy that we had so we could run out and get the carcasses and not get eaten by the tigers in the process. And all these things that our brains were cooking up about all the things that we could do, were just like, no. We better sit and watch the ancient world version of television and rest so that we're able to just run out and get that carcass without getting eaten by the tiger. At least that's one theory. I don't know just how true that is, but it sounds pretty true to me. All right, let's check in with the chat here. Goju says, to set and accomplish goals sounds like an expression of the will or volition. Just my opinion, of course. I still don't really understand, but the reality is we don't have any evidence for free will, but we do have acts of will. And so you could be right. I don't know how volition plays in here, but maybe I just don't have your understanding of that word. But it's an interesting discussion, and it gets into this, because if there's no free will, then how do you get yourself to enact acts of will? And there's a lot of luck and chance involved. And so this is one of the neat things that the internet has made. It's made more trees in the forest for people to bump into, which means that they're more likely to start enacting acts of will that they never could have otherwise, because free will doesn't exist, and you can will, all of the knowledge you want to just run into you, but it's not going to happen, right? All the guidance and direction, just because you want it to, is not going to make it somehow manifest. But it's starting to happen, and more people are running into the same messages, and then they're starting to be able to make acts of will that lead to different sorts of things, and then it takes on a characteristic of its own in terms of brain chemistry and so forth, because you get the formation of habits that make it very difficult to stop doing the things that work, which is beautiful. All right, Mr. Rosebud said, sounds like my approach to health and fitness videos. No matter how many watch, I never lose any weight. No, watching them won't do much. And of course, going to the gym won't necessarily make you lose weight either. You've got to focus on the diet. And obviously, all of the fitness helps, and it will make an impact. But it's the diet that matters. And so, reading diet books also doesn't do anything. You've got to experiment with diets. Nick says to Rosebud, time for me to jump on my bike right now and cycle home. Happy travels. Be safe. Goju says, volition just means related to the process of will. Maybe the term is not well understood. Sorry for the confusion. No, I know what volition means, but I just still don't simply see how that it would play here. And you say you don't believe in free will. Interesting. Well, I don't believe in anything. Why would anybody believe in anything? There's no need to believe. Belief is a goofy thing that people do, but if you have evidence, you don't need to believe in it, because the evidence supports the idea, the claim behind a thing, right? So why would anybody believe in anything? The belief is not necessary. It's not needed. It really isn't. So It's a very interesting topic, but it's not that I disbelieve or believe in free will. There's just no evidence for it. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. If you have any, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. And it's certainly one of the problems in books like this, which is that the most direct means to eternal bliss kind of makes you feel like, well, if I'm not getting it, there must be something wrong with me or whatever. But it's really just because the person is not putting things into practice. And then we have this issue, well, why can't they? Why can't they do this? Don't they have enough will? But we know that willpower doesn't work, to quote the title of the Benjamin Hardy book, and it's because it doesn't exist. You can't really work with something that doesn't exist. All right, so you're typing at 4:14 a.m. Well, that's not necessarily good for your memory unless you're a night worker, but appreciate the discussion. And yeah, it's an interesting topic, but I'm still waiting for a definition of free will. One of the interesting things that happened is somebody wanted to debate me on the nature of free will, and I said, sure, I would be happy to debate you about it. And then when the time came to do the debate, the person said, well, that they were going to do this anonymously, and I wouldn't even know their name. So it's a bit of a longer story, but basically it was a guy said that a guy I knew wanted me to debate with another person. And I said, yeah, sure, whatever. So my contact said, yeah, he'll do the debate, but he's going to be anonymous. Or, well, basically how it worked is I said, just give me his email address and his name so that, we can set up the technology and all this sort of stuff. And he said, oh, no, he wants to be anonymous. And I said, well, I'm not going to debate anybody who needs to be anonymous over such a banal topic such as free will. It's not even particularly interesting. Anybody with two nuts rolling around in their head knows that free will doesn't exist. Like, it's just, this is not so interesting. What does he need to protect himself for? And I said, here's a good opportunity for us to have the debate of free will right now. If he has free will, if he believes that free will exists, then he'll supply his real name and do so of his own volition. Well, he didn't, because he doesn't have free will. It was a perfect example. I won the debate without even having to show up because I was able to demonstrate that he doesn't have free will. Just use your name. It's it was a funny one. Anyway, and it sounds like a bit of a gimmick, a bit of a catch, a bit of a gotcha, but it's a perfect example. It's a perfect example of how free will doesn't exist. If he had free will, he would have just supplied his name like that, and then away we go. But he had his reasons, you see. He had his reasons. In the same way that I have my reasons why I'm not going to debate a guy who won't use his real name. I don't have free will in it either. I'm just not going to do it. I could tell you all kinds of stories about why I'm not going to debate a guy who won't use his real name. But at the end of the day, I ain't going to do it. And I'm not going to change because I don't have free will in it. Because my convictions say if you're going to debate somebody, it'll be a person who's willing to put their name and face on something, right? So it's just very simple proof of concept right there. All right. Goju says, definitely not interested in debating. Folks are free to believe what best fits their experience, for better or worse. Or he exercised free will in not giving you his name. I don't think so. Because he wanted to debate me, right? And he's not, in not giving his name, he's following his, whatever it was that originally wanted him to not give his name. It's not that he was exercising free will and not giving the name. That I can't even see how that is possible. And so you can try and give evidence of that, but I don't think it's going to work out. He's actually yoked by his original impetus that didn't want him to give his name in the first place, right? So that's very simple. Mr. Rosebud says free will equals the illusion of choice. Is there choice? You have the illusion of choice in life, but what do you really have? What you have is an array of potential avenues for action that appear in front of you, and you select from them. Now, you can be semantic and say, well, you're choosing, but you're not really choosing. You're selecting, right? And to not select is itself a selection inside of the set, right? So this can get down to semantics, but at the end of the day, there's not even choice, really. There's just selection. And that selection is not coming from a free will. It's coming from multiple pressures that cause something to happen. And then we tell ourselves stories that our will and our wants and whatever it is what drove us to make that selection. Pretty sure that's the most streamlined and clear way to do it. And back to this book, he's really talking about this a lot, because the problem is that a lot of people do not have what he calls an intense desire for liberation. So then he has a number of recommendations about what to do if the intense desire for liberation does not arise in you. And it's really quite good. So he says, the words in this book will be of little or no real benefit to you. The ego will interpret what is written here in the book you are now reading. The ego will create arguments against what is written here. Instead of seeing what you read literally without any interpretation, the ego will begin to interpret. The ego will change the teachings into something that preserves the ego instead of something that brings the ego to its final end. Therefore, the most essential key is to awaken the extremely intense desire for liberation and to make that desire for freedom grow every day. And that's back to the memory stuff, because he says the number one thing you can work on is your memory, so that you even remember that you have the desire, and then you remember the well-known steps to liberation. And you need a liberator, which in Sanskrit is vimuktidam, and that liberator is something that essentially is with you at all times, so long as you actually have practiced well enough to see it, to experience, to, in effect, be it. Kierkegaard is dead, so I don't know if it's a Kierkegaardian thing to say, but in any case, Koju says, does the author want us to read this book? Well, I don't know, but I'd be very pleased if you did. I don't know if you will or not, but I'd say it's worth every penny. And you can certainly get a sense of his character, which is very interesting, by looking up his YouTube channel, because I've been enjoying going through a lot of his videos. I don't know if I'll go through them all, but he's quite a speaker. So I've been having fun. And again, I have to thank Dorothy, who is in the Magnetic Mary Method Mastermind, who recommended this because of some of the things that we were saying. And I was just delighted to find so much of really interesting thoughts that relate to memory in this, as well as that spatial exercise, which I shared with you earlier, that I hope everyone tries, because it's a great way of demonstrating to yourself how you have more than enough space for more than enough memory palaces to accomplish any memory goal that you could possibly ever like. So that's something very, very important. Kierkegaard wrote a massive text titled Either Or, which is exactly what you were saying. Well, that's a high compliment indeed, but I have a hard time imagining I was saying exactly what is in Kierkegaard. So I'll take the compliment, but on the condition that we recognize that to say exactly what is in Kierkegaard is pretty much impossible. That would be like saying, and I would associate the thinking that I have most with Nietzsche and things of that ilk rather than Kierkegaard. But even that would be too much of a stretch, because to say Nietzsche is too much, because it's just such a vast body of work. Most people aren't even aware of just how much he wrote, because it hasn't even been translated yet into English. Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I don't see that that's a qualification to give me such high honors and an association to Kierkegaard. And I think I said something a little bit more nuanced than not to choose is to choose, because I was saying that in the context of saying that choice doesn't exist, it's selection. So I may have used those words, but that was not the point. And I don't think Nietzsche was an existentialist. That's not possible, given that term didn't even exist. And if anything, Nietzsche was more of a perspectivist if you have to give him something. But the reality is that Nietzsche's dead, like Kierkegaard is dead. Nietzsche's not anything. And this is very, very important to understand. And it's why when you said first that, this is Kierkegaardian, I said, no, Kierkegaard is dead. It can't possibly be. So Nietzsche can't be an existentialist. He's not. If anything, he's a perspectivist. And even that is a false and misleading thing to say. What is Nietzsche? Nietzsche is a bridge between you and I, or you and whoever we're speaking to now live and in the replay, that we're going to build afresh, new, in the moment. All those books that are sitting there with his name on it, either by translators or otherwise, his own name untranslated, they're just books with ink on them. They are effectively nothing. They are effectively dead. Nietzsche is a thing in discourse, and it is a series of perspectives that are being hashed out. He knew this. He wrote about this very, very intensively and did all that he could to demonstrate it. Nietzsche is, in effect, nothing. It doesn't even exist. Never did, never will. Except for right now, in this moment, as we're discussing it. Maybe there's a bunch of other people elsewhere also discussing Nietzsche. I sure hope so. But it is, in effect, a thing that comes into, it territorializes, to use that term earlier from today. It territorializes, and then it's going to deterritorialize afterwards. And so it is very, very, very important to treat things as they are as much as possible, and not reify them, and not reify. I'm not going to add another word because I think that's probably the best one for the task. All right. And no, Nietzsche didn't believe in free will. Nietzsche didn't have beliefs. This is this is so important to understand. Not only, or at least in his writings, there's no reason to believe that he had beliefs or believed in things, because it would be such a silly thing to do. If anything, Nietzsche said, if you're going to believe in things, those things may as well be dead because of how you treat them, because you would even paint them with the idea of belief. This is a complete violation of the great becoming that is becoming what it is going to become. It's very very clear in how that all works. And maybe Sartre would do that, but we don't know, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is what we do, and Sartre would say this, and he did say this, what matters is what you do, and that the things that you do actually have an outcome for some meaning. I don't know that I fully agree that meaning is even possible, but that would be, that is something that Sartre wrote very clearly. In any case, all fun and games at the end of the day. And if you're paying attention, this is the most direct means to eternal bliss, happening right now. When else would it happen? If you're paying attention, we're in the bliss right now. This is the eternal bliss. It's not existence precedes essence, and is not essence precedes existence. It's this right now happening. So you asked if I had a core text, and I do. It's called the Magnetic Mary Method Masterclass, and that is available to you at any time on magneticmarymethod.com. Suggest that you start with the free course at magneticmarymethod.com/YT. That link is available to you now. Below, you can click on that link and get registered up. And I hope that you will if you haven't already. And if the time is right, then just join up for that masterclass, because it has what you need to be able to use these techniques and ultimately lead yourself to being able to complete these goals. Sitting down, if you want to set a goal like I've set goals to memorize certain amounts of Sanskrit, then you'll be able to do that. And there's examples in there of how that plays out with images that show you inside of a memory palace and how the images are placed, how they work in relation to each other, how the mental modes are tapped into in order to be able to memorize sound and meaning in the same blow. And it doesn't have to be ancient Sanskrit. It's names of people, it's numbers, it's poetry, etc. I am from Canada, Western Canada, but I did spend some time in the United States, and taught at Rutgers, which was a great, wonderful experience. So, summing up, ladies and gentlemen, this is a great book. I really liked it. I want to thank Dorothy again for recommending it. And I really think that the thoughts on memory are profound. I'm going to get some of his other books to read, and it's something he basically suggests not to do. Don't get any other books. Read this book. Read every sentence 3 times. Read every chapter 3 times, and it'll be odd to go against that recommendation and still go read his other books. And he's certainly set up for people to read his other books, so it's a bit contradictory, but you got to understand the point. You got to understand what he's arguing and why that he's arguing it, which is simply, no, it's not literally don't go read other books. It's to point out that people just simply don't actually read and remember the teachings, and then they forget not only the teachings, but they forget to put the teachings into action. So I highly recommend that you understand that and don't take everything so literally, but also remember when you're gobbling down the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the big shiny object, have you really finished with the first one? And in this case, I haven't really finished with the first one, but I'd say 87% of the time I'm aware that right now is the only thing that's happening. And if that isn't the eternal bliss that they're talking about, I have no idea what they're talking about. It must be over my head, because the whole name of the game is to understand that now is it, right? There ain't no past. There's no future. There may be a future coming, but where else would that future be? Other than right here, right now, wherever here may be. And here and now kind of go together. I don't know where you are now, but it's just happening, right? What else do you need to pay attention to? And so I remember not being able to pay attention to the present moment at all. I think it was absolute complete hell. And elements of that are still here, where it's just, all sorts of things going on, little stories coming up in the mind and so forth. But as I've shown up to practice for now going on 2.5 years, reciting the same Sanskrit over and over and over again, I haven't missed a day in all that time. It's getting quieter and quieter and quieter inside this head. And so this goal of killing the ego, reducing the ego, eliminating the ego, potentially eliminating the ego, I'm not sure that it can be done. But this default mode network, it's processing, it's all I focused, I, me, these kinds of thoughts, they're getting less and less and less, which means that the techniques, the teaching is working. And that means going into what's called the task positive network, which is the zone, just being in the now. And we have every reason to believe, quote unquote, believe. We have all the evidence that we need to get rid of our beliefs and just dive in and do the work, because we have the brain scans, and the brain scans show that with certain meditation techniques, these task positive networks switch on. They actually take over, right? And you can spend significant amounts of time in this task positive network. And so you're right, 87% does seem very specific. I didn't just pull that number out of a hat. I've actually done some of the exercises which are taught in this book here, Happiness Beyond Thought by Gary Weber. It shows you how that you can actually track your thought and put a number like that on there. So it's one of the most powerful exercises. I remember sitting with my friend William. I don't know if he's going to watch this replay or if he's here now, but he said he was doing it. And basically, if you do it a couple times a day, you can come up with a number of just how often your mind is all over the place. So very, very interesting. Let's see. I was at Rutgers, would have been 2007, that year. So yeah, that would be right. I can't believe it's so long ago. Wow. Had my own office there. That was awesome. I think it was called Murray Hall. Does that sound right? I'll resist the urge to look it up. But I worked for the English department, and Kurt Spellmeyer was my boss in the English department, and wow, he was really great. I learned so much about teaching from him, and learned a lot about just what great writing is from him. He's a great writer, and yeah. And trekking out, I lived in Manhattan at the time, and trekking out to New Brunswick to teach was quite something, especially in winter, cold and snow and all that sort of stuff. But really like living in a movie. It was really like a movie. And then I remember there's the courthouses near the train station. Like the university is on the right side of the tracks, and then there's the wrong side of the tracks. But there at that time there was a campus bookstore on the wrong side of the tracks. And anyway, just super interesting territory to visit in my memory. So I'm glad it came up today. I always like these memory blips. Let's see here. Yours truly is here. Love from India. Well, love right back at you in India. Good to see you. Namaste. Mr. Rosebud said, rats, no result on Audible for the most direct means to eternal bliss. Oh, well, thanks for looking it up, Rosebud. What I would suggest is just look up his YouTube channel. I don't know if he reads the whole book or not. I mean, I haven't gone through every one of his videos, but you can hear him speak, and he's quite interesting. He's entertaining. He's fun. Why would you want to do that? I've worked hard on my ego for many decades. Well, me too, and that's why I'm tired of it. Ready for it to go. So you worked for the psych department. Murray is right across the road from the infamous grease trucks. Yeah. What an area that is. So many little memory palaces there, and lots to think about. Even the train into Manhattan can be its own memory palace. And if you know a lot about reusing things, then there's ways to add features to those trains so that they become different memory palaces. You could conceivably do one for every day of the year. Now, how that would play out in practice is up for you to discover. But what you can do with memory palaces is not necessarily what you should do. But yeah, if you had a 3-digit PAO, you could certainly do it, and there's a number of ways to do it. You could also do it with, well, let's save that for another time. Listen, everybody, it's been fantastic as always hanging out with you. I hope that you found some use in this, and I hope you'll go out and check out this book or look up Michael Langford's YouTube channel. It's certainly not anything that I'm an affiliate marketer for or get any kickback for. I just thought you might find it useful and interesting, and hope you do. If you're watching the replay, let me know in the comments how things are going for you. If you are here with us now and haven't hit that thumbs up yet, do so now. Let the robots know that you care about the memory tradition, and I'd love to hear more from people. If you're interested in more on meditation and memory, I personally think that Langford is right in the most direct means to eternal bliss, that meditation cannot really begin without proper memory techniques, so that you remember the teachings, remember what to do in those meditations, and that you actually remember to meditate. You remember to practice the practice. Because if you're not showing up, you're never going to get there, and your ego is going to take over. Your ego is going to yoke you every time. You know, and 2.5 years, I have not missed a day in my meditation this round. But often there's something that just yokes me away from it, that wants me to not do the practice, not recite everything I've memorized and so forth. And you just have to practice the practice of showing up. And it's the most bizarre thing. But then once I get myself in there, I can't get myself out because I'm having too much fun, having too much bliss. So it's weird. I don't really understand it. But in the book that I'm working on now, that I'm revisiting again because it's not just quite right, I talk a lot about how that I've been able to get this unit, to use a Fred Davis term that he uses. I've been able to get this unit to do stuff even when it doesn't want to, even when it doesn't have the discipline to do it. And I'm going to just, I also recommend that you read Fred Davis. So I've been reading a bunch of his books, and Awaken Now is another one. So, Yes, Nick. Well, we met just when I started. Just when I started. And so, you can fact checked my numbers. You're better with numbers than I am, but I believe it's now officially 2 years since I got here, and I started just when I got here with the first memorization, and I got so many of those verses now in my head. It's unbelievable. I'm glad, because it's the longest and largest amount of text that I've ever memorized, and I see no signs of stopping. And the cool thing is that once I like, this goes back to what we were talking about before. Like, it's a real discipline to stick with the original goal, to memorize everything that Gary Weber talks about having memorized. And it's a lot of stuff. And I want to move on. I want to memorize my own things, that I've discovered along the way. And, reading this book here, The Diamond Cutter, which you might be interested in because it's all about applying Buddhism to business. And more things. But he's a great memorizer. So he's actually a geisha, and he had to memorize tons and tons of stuff, and he's a translator of Tibetan and whatnot. I don't know all about his cred, but they gave him, I think he was one of the first North Americans to become a geisha in a couple hundred years or something like this, and so that's like a pretty big thing. And then the way the story goes is that his teacher said, well, now that you are a geisha, you're not going to sit around here sitting on your couch drinking tea waiting for people to come and ask you questions while you use little children monks as your messenger to send messages, because they don't have phones. They just whisper into people's ears, and then the little monks go and run and talk to each other there. But one of the things that he was told to do was go and get into business to see if they could, this is how the story goes, that to see if he could put the practices that he learned from the Tibetan Buddhism into the real world and actualize what it was that they taught there. And it all sounds quite legit. Good to see you, Ben. Wonderful. Yeah. So I got a whole bunch here. I got Awaken Now, Fred Davis, Happiness Beyond Thought, and The Direct Means to Eternal Bliss. Have you read this? It's really quite something. I dig it. And I was just talking about the diamond cutter there, which I was telling you about the other day. Goju says, I never linked memory techniques with meditation, but it makes sense. It does, yeah. Well, his argument is, and again, it's not strictly in this book, but this book plus his YouTube channel. I know I'm repeating myself 1,000 times, but repetition is the mother of memory in one sense or another, is that people forget. They forget to meditate. They forget to actually use the tools in their meditations. And it's very, very, very important. Yeah, I think you're gonna dig this. And check out his YouTube channel and listen to his voice for a while, because he's quite something, quite a speaker. And I think you'll like his style. I like this, like just a perfect part here. So after 27 years, I'll start a little bit earlier. Many different combinations of approaches and the different views of what I am means is what I needed to focus on. After 27 years, the author was still not sure what I am means in direct experience. The author was wondering if there was some way to solve these questions and to have clarity both in the meaning of I or I am and how to approach it. Whether to focus the attention on I am or feel I am or think I am, or the author wanted an understanding that was so clear there would be nothing vague remaining, no more choices remaining. The author really wanted to know the answer. The author was not going to confine the answer to any previous understanding. The author was willing to have his previous understanding shattered, if necessary. I love that. And so Ben was the great shatterer in part of my story, to be sure. So we've been talking about you in a roundabout way, and lo and behold, you show up. Isn't that interesting? This is Jungian synchronicity, if ever there was such a thing. Maybe. Of course, it's also the internet, which is the great I am, if ever there was one, right? Anyway, I dig this book a lot, and it's just one of those cool things. I hope that everybody will read it and give it a try, and definitely play around with this spatial exercise, because I like how the space exercise goes out into space and how that it goes into inner space. Rugamba is in the house. Thanks for saying hello, Rugamba. Good to see you. And wonderful, wonderful to be doing this. I would, again, love to hear more from people if they're interested in more material on meditation. It's coming anyway. But just so you know, we shot a new playlist today, a series of videos. They'll hopefully be coming out soon. There's going to be a couple videos that come out before the new playlist. But always appreciate all your thumbs up and your comments on those videos. They are not only, just great to continue the discussion, to hear what you think and whatnot, but also to let the robots know that humans care about this particular teaching. And then this particular teaching can continue to show up and care about you, which it certainly does. All right. So thanks everybody for being here today. Let me know in the discussion below, if you're watching the replay, how things are going for you. And until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic. Bye-bye.